Now, what is humanity's greatest flaw? Many would say narcissism, arrogance, aggression, or ignorance, but according to who, passively believing misinformation, both visual and auditory, is equally detrimental. Now, think about COVID-19 misinformation. Not only did 48% of the world believe it, but their respective societal response to it adversely affected the community. The consequences, well, misinformation distorted people's risk perception about COVID, causing them to reject containment strategies such as vaccinations, and misinformation also polarized public opinions about China, fostering a culture of bigotry. These consequences highlight the need for us to learn how to filter through misinformation as soon as possible. And our research question aims to solve just this. How? Well, by proposing an intervention that could break those mental barriers which coerce individuals to believe misinformation. Thus, our research question became whether an active technique based inoculation intervention increases accuracy rate in detecting visual misinformation or auditory misinformation. In fact, our study's importance lies in one, bridging research gaps, and two, mitigating social consequences that threaten public health and the individual health. But the question is, how did we arrive at this research question? Well, we first evaluated existing interventions on misinformation, and those are debunking versus pre-bunking, which originates from the theory of inoculation. Debunking corrects misinformation after exposure by fact checking. Pre-bunking, or the theory of inoculation, confers large-scale psychological resistance to anticipated exposure of misinformation. Pre-bunking was chosen over debunking. Why? Well, getting people to believe fact checks after exposure is quite challenging as they would have already processed the misinformation. In contrast, pre-bunking preemptively builds resilience and thus prevents us from believing misinformation in the first place. Indeed, pre-bunking can be implemented by building resistance against two things. That is, one, impending individual arguments that are misleading, or two, common manipulation techniques that underpin misinformation. And we chose manipulation techniques. Why? Well, individual arguments hinder the scalability of inoculation interventions to other examples of misinformation given their focus on inoculating against single arguments. Manipulation techniques nonetheless improve such scalability as all examples of misinformation use the same manipulation tropes. And those tropes are emotionally evocative language and impersonation / the fake expert technique. These will be analyzed and used for inoculation without prior knowledge of misinformation content. And this then would provide broad resilience against other examples of misinformation that we see in the real world. However, these effects are subject to the method implemented, that is, passive or active. Passive involves reading a text that warns us about a manipulation technique, and active entails participating in self-instructed activities via YouTube or games with a reward system. And active has shown to build more resistance to misinformation than passive, thereby becoming our area of study. Nonetheless, the protective effect of technique-based active inoculation interventions in real-world settings remains underexplored. The 2021 preliminary study showed that the active method empowered people to, one, resist manipulation techniques and accurately identify COVID-19 related misinformation. However, whether these findings extend to real-world settings where there's different types of misinformation, not just COVID-19 on social media, and different modalities of which misinformation is delivered, auditory and not just visual, remains unanswered. Essentially, our aim is to thus bridge this literature gap in an ecologically valid manner, punctuating why this is our research question. So, what did we hypothesize? Well, given that the 2021 study found that inoculated participants had a statistically higher accuracy rate in detecting misinformation than non inoculated participants, it is reasonable to hypothesize a similar result in this study. And the 2020 study found that inoculated participants showed statistically higher accuracy rate for detecting visual misinformation than for auditory. It is thus reasonable to hypothesize that a similar result will be observed for this comparison.
So our research will recruit 100 undergraduate psychology students aged between 18 to 24 years old through the Sono portal system. We'll be using an experimental 2x2 mixed factorial design with 50 students randomly allocated to a between subjects factor of either the non-intervention group or the intervention group. Both groups will be further split in half into within subject factors, with 25 participants being exposed to either 25 audio content articles or 25 video content articles. And these articles will be mixed between some being factual articles and some being misleading misinformation articles. So all groups are first undergo pre-tests in which they're exposed to either 25 visual or 25 audio content and are asked to judge if the content is accurate or if it's inaccurate and based on false misinformation. The dependent variable in this case is the accuracy rate percentage, which is operationalized by measuring the proportion of correct identifications of misinformation in the content based on them judging either inaccurate or accurate. The content is pulled from a mix of sources ranging from political, health, current affairs, and general content that may be spread through the media. And this infographic here on the slide is just an example of one of the visual content they may see. The non-intervention group will play a simple game of Tetris to mimic the gaming scenario that the intervention group has, but without learning any of the manipulation techniques. The intervention group, on the other hand, will play a short 5-minute browser game called Go Viral, created by Basil and colleagues to educate participants about manipulation techniques used in the spread of misinformation. This game acts as an active inoculation intervention, as participants are made to engage with the game and create content of their own to learn the principles of two manipulation techniques that we often see in the spread of misinformation, opposed to a passive inoculation technique where information is solely given to the participants without requiring engagement. The first technique that participants learn about is the use of emotionally evocative language, with a specific focus on the use of fear-mongering that is present in news outlets specifically. The use of emotionally evocative language has been shown to increase the virality of social media content and the spread of misinformation. And we can see again, just on the slide, an example of this emotionally evocative language we might see in a social media post. The second technique focuses on the use of fake experts, which a study by Cook and colleagues found can be particularly rampant online and has been used by politicians and lobbyists, with an example of this being linked back to the Leipzig Declaration, in which signatures were gathered refuting climate change, but were later found that many people who signed did not even work in the field relating to climate sciences. This technique shows participants how easy and accessible it is to pretend to be an expert online, and how misinformation can spread through the use of these trusted experts. Once participants have finished playing either Tetris or the Go Viral game, they'll be given another post-test identical to the pre-test, in which they'll be exposed to the same 25 audio or visual content articles, and will be asked again to rate the content based on if it's accurate or inaccurate. Using both the pre and post-test scores, we can compare if participants have learned how to spot manipulation techniques used in misinformation, and if they can make more accurate judgments on the accuracy of the misleading content they come across online and in the articles presented to them.
So, how will we analyze the data, and what outcomes can we expect? Given the nature of our study's design, a two-way ANOVA t-test will be carried out on the resulting data, which will reveal the statistical power of both the effects of inoculation versus control, as well as the effects seen between the difference in the medium the information was delivered, audio versus visual. For our experiment, the dependent variable is the number of correct responses out of 20, or an accuracy rating, which will be operationalized by measuring the proportion of correct identifications of misinformation on a yes/no basis. The research question will be tested in a mixed design, where the proportion of correct identifications of misinformation will be measured. The within subjects factor will be the two modes of misinformation presentation, auditory versus visual, and the between subjects factor will be control groups versus inoculation intervention groups. As stated in our initial hypothesis, in line with current literature, a larger effect will be seen in the visually inoculated condition compared to the audio inoculated condition. These results show that although inoculation, specifically pre-bunking, have been shown to reduce the spread of misinformation, the ways in which it spreads have yet to be experimentally controlled for. With the growing use of social medias and the emergence of many new podcasts, multimedia videos such as TikTok, and infinite social scrollers, the issue has never been more relevant. The term, "what you see is all there is," popularized by Kleinman, shows how impactful issues surrounding misinformation can be, with clear cognitive biases being at play. This is where, as psychologists, we are able to apply our knowledge of cognitive heuristics and biases in an applied manner to attempt to bring psychological research into the pressing modern issues that the world is facing. Furthermore, the need for psychological interventions in digital spaces is clearly a growing area of concern, with the growing use of malicious algorithms, such as those used by Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, polarizing opinions which can be harmful to a harmonious society. With the growing trend of virality and filtered perspective of life, the way we as individuals interact with the digital world is an area that is desperate for more attention, and with the nature of user experience becoming more and more central in everyone's everyday life. It's for all these reasons that there is need for further research into the effective and active interventions and how they interact with our evolving world. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll now move on to questions from the class.